Airport guard pushes. Black pregnant woman. 10 minutes later, she's escorted by military officials. A flurry of footsteps echoed across the polished floors at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport as frantic travelers hurried to catch their flights. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the security checkpoint. Voices were raised. Curious onlookers paused in alarm. In the middle of it all, a black pregnant woman stood trembling, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her boarding pass. An airport security guard face, twisted in anger, shoved her roughly. Gasps spread like wildfire through the crowd. 10 minutes later, an unexpected scene shocked everyone. Even more, the same woman was calmly escorted back by stern-faced military officials, turning the entire terminal upside down. The day began with the typical rush that defined Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It was 7:00 a.m., and the lines at the security checkpoints were already snaking around corners. Business travelers in immaculate suits clutched their briefcases. Vacationing families, corralled, excited children, and jet-lagged tourists shuffled forward in a daze. For Yvonne Carter, this day was supposed to be another step forward in a life she had meticulously pieced together. 7 months pregnant and glowing with the promise of motherhood, she was traveling alone to New York City for a critical prenatal appointment with a specialist who had followed her high-risk pregnancy from the start. Though she was anxious, she was also excited. Her unborn child, a girl, had finally grown strong enough that the doctors were more hopeful than ever. Clad in a comfortable maternity dress and sweater, Yvonne tried to remain calm amid the airport bustle. She ran a hand over her belly gently, as if reassuring her baby that everything would be fine. The line surged ahead, and she felt relieved she might still have time to grab a quick snack before her flight. Her eyes flicked up to the overhead monitor to confirm her departure time, 8:30 a.m. She had a good 90 minutes. No stress, she told herself. Little did she know that in less than half an hour her life would collide with a cruel twist of fate at the security checkpoint, and the entire airport would be turned into a stage for a drama that no one present would ever forget. Across the terminal airport security guard, Paul Bowers made his rounds. It was his 4th year on the job, but tension lined his face. The morning had begun with an argument at home, leaving him in a foul mood. He had stormed out before his wife could finish berating him for always putting work above everything else. For Paul, the job was everything. Maintaining order in one of the busiest airports in the world gave him a sense of importance. He was known among his co-workers for a strict approach. Some saw him as overly harsh, but others admired his dedication to the rule-book. Today his temperament was dangerously frayed, and he seemed determined to vent his anger on someone, anyone who gave him the slightest reason. Strapped into his uniform, scanning the crowds, he looked for the smallest infraction, the tiniest sign of disobedience. Yet, ironically, despite his strictness, Paul had a dark secret. He'd been warned about discriminatory behavior in the past. He was currently on a final notice after a formal complaint was filed by an elderly Hispanic man who accused him of excessive force. That morning, a manager had reminded Paul, "One more complaint, and you're suspended without pay." Paul had simply nodded, but he felt his anger simmering now. As he approached the security checkpoint where Yvonne was waiting, the threads of these two lives began to tangle. Yvonne stood near the roped queue, inching forward. She kept one hand on her belly as the baby kicked lightly. Her daughter always seemed to wake up around this time of the morning. Nearing the checkpoint, she took out her ID and boarding pass, careful not to jostle the people around her. Suddenly, someone behind her bumped into her backpack. "Sorry," the traveler muttered, trying to push past. Yvonne turned around calmly. "Please don't push, I'm pregnant." The impatient traveler shot her a glare, but said nothing more. Yvonne tried to keep her cool. She was too close to her flight to risk any more trouble. Just then, Paul stepped forward. He had witnessed the minor scuffle from a distance and marched over, face cold as steel. "Is there a problem here?" he barked. The impatient traveller pointed at Yvonne. "She's holding up the line," he complained in exasperation. Paul's gaze shifted to Yvonne, and in that single moment something flickered in his eyes. Disdain, annoyance, perhaps even prejudice. He noticed her belly, then her face, and he said curtly, "Mom, you need to follow directions and keep the line moving." Caught off guard by the harsh tone, Yvonne stammered, "I'm not holding anyone up, I just got bumped, that's all." She tried to keep her composure, but her voice shook. Stress hormones coursed through her body, dangerous for someone with a high-risk pregnancy. Her heart fluttered anxiously. Paul crossed his arms. "Mom, you can't argue at the checkpoint. Either comply or step aside for additional screening." His voice carried enough edge to rattle even those who weren't the target. Yvonne felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. She tried to calm herself. She'd come too far to let anyone sabotage her trip. Besides, she had an appointment in New York that could be critical to her unborn child's health. She nodded respectfully, hoping to smooth things over. "I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. I'll keep going." But Paul didn't step aside. He wanted to assert his control. "Actually," he said flatly, "I think I should take you for additional screening right now." The line around them hushed. Some travelers looked on with sympathy. Others just wanted to get through. Yvonne swallowed. I'm just trying to get to my appointment." "Could you, Mom?" Paul interrupted. "Move." And with that, he placed a hand on Yvonne's shoulder and shoved her backward, albeit not violently enough to knock her down, but forcefully enough that she lost her balance. Her carry-on bag slipped from her grip, and she stumbled one hand instinctively, rushing to protect her stomach. A collective gasp erupted among the onlookers. Several people cried out, "Hey, watch it!" "She's pregnant." Yvonne's breath hitched in her throat, shock flooding her system. She clutched her belly, trembling, anger, fear, and humiliation wrapped around her like a vice. The push had not hurt her physically in a severe way, but the emotional blow was colossal. She was a black woman, pregnant, singled out, shoved by a man in a position of authority. Paul's face hardened. He refused to back down. "I'm going to escort you for additional screening." Now Yvonne realized at that moment that this man's hostility was more than just professional strictness. It felt personal. Her voice quivered. I'm not resisting, but you had no right to push me." The tension in the air felt tangible. A well-dressed bystander holding a smartphone stepped forward. Outrage etched into his features. "I've got that on video," he announced. Paul glared at the man. "Stay back," he warned. But it was too late. The crowd was paying attention, and so were other airport security personnel. Yvonne's hands shook with stress and fear, her eyes brimming with tears. She had no idea that in 10 short minutes, her entire situation would transform in a way no one present could have anticipated. Unbeknownst to Paul, Yvonne Carter was not just any passenger. She was the wife of Captain Jonathan Carter, a highly decorated officer in the United States Army. Jonathan, currently deployed overseas, had sent one of his closest subordinates, Sergeant Alicia Meadows, to ensure that Yvonne made her flight and to accompany her discreetly. Sergeant Meadows had been trailing behind, giving Yvonne enough personal space, but ready to intervene if needed in the swirling chaos. Sergeant Meadows watched the push in stunned disbelief, her fists clenching. She was in civilian clothes, trying not to draw attention, but once Yvonne was shoved, Meadows strode forward decisively. "Is there a problem here?" She demanded her posture, reflecting her military bearings. Paul turned, noticing this new figure stepping up. He saw a strong-looking woman with braided hair, fierce eyes, and no visible uniform. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped, still fuming. Meadows, however, was not someone easily dismissed. She fixed Paul with a look. "You just assaulted a pregnant woman, and I will not stand by," she said, voice low but full of quiet threat. She slipped a phone from her pocket and dialed with practiced speed. Meanwhile, Yvonne clutched her belly, tears of distress marking her cheeks. Concerned onlookers hovered, uncertain whether to step in or keep their distance. Paul's manager, a man named Darius Hughes, rushed over, having seen the commotion on the security cameras. His face was a portrait of alarm. "Paul." What happened before Paul could speak? Meadows stepped in. "I'm placing a call, and I strongly suggest you get your supervisors and an airport medic here, now," she ordered. Her tone brooked no argument. Darius turned to Paul, wide-eyed. "You shoved a pregnant woman." Paul's face reddened. "She was resisting, so I had to." But even as he tried to defend himself, more travelers began to speak up. "She wasn't resisting. You should have seen it." It was completely uncalled for. Tension was snowballing rapidly. Paul's attempt to control the narrative was slipping away. Meanwhile, Yvonne was escorted by Meadows to a seat near the security checkpoint. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged. Adrenaline made her shaky. She worried. What if the stress harmed the baby? She had no idea that Meadows had already placed a call to someone with the power to make the entire airport stand still if necessary. In an office on the other side of the airport, Colonel Anthony Reynolds, part of the local National Guard unit, was finalizing departure details for a group of soldiers returning from a humanitarian mission. Reynolds was a close friend to Captain Jonathan Carter and had volunteered to keep an eye on Yvonne's travel arrangements whenever she passed through Atlanta. When Sergeant Meadows' call came, in the colonel's expression darkened with controlled fury. "Sergeant, calm down and speak clearly," he said, though his heart hammered in his chest. He listened intently to Meadows' clipped explanation of what had just transpired. "Understood," he replied. "I'll be there in minutes." Then he gathered several uniformed personnel, waiting for their flight. "Follow me. We have a situation." Within moments, the colonel and 6 uniformed officers were moving swiftly through the concourses toward the security checkpoint. Their presence instantly commanded attention from TSA staff, airport employees, and travelers alike. They moved with a sense of purpose that left bystanders stepping aside, a ripple of alarm and curiosity spreading in their wake. All the while, Paul Bowers tried to maintain a facade of professionalism. As his manager questioned him, Darius, looking distraught, asked Paul for his version of events, while also taking statements from onlookers. The partial cell phone video was replayed, fueling the crowd's outrage. Yvonne, drained but determined, explained what had happened, tears shining in her eyes. Barely 10 minutes had passed since the initial shove, and the tension in that waiting area was thick enough to cut with a knife. That was the moment everything changed, when Colonel Reynolds and his group of National Guard personnel strode in, scanning the scene with laser-sharp focus. The atmosphere inside the terminal was thick with tension. Muted whispers floated through the crowd, travelers frozen mid-journey, as if unsure whether they were witnessing a moment of crisis or history. Just minutes earlier, a pregnant black woman had been publicly shoved by a TSA officer. Now the entire terminal was about to be stunned again. They came in formation. Colonel Anthony Reynolds, dressed in full military uniform, led a unit of 6 soldiers, all wearing crisp National Guard attire. Their boots moved with purpose across the polished floor, echoing like a drumbeat of authority. Passengers instinctively stepped aside. Some took out phones. Others simply stared, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Reynolds didn't pause. His eyes scanned the checkpoint until they landed on the woman seated near the far corner, her face pale and streaked with tears, one arm wrapped protectively around her abdomen. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked gently as he approached, his voice lower than expected, but rich with strength. Yvonne looked up, blinking in disbelief. "Yes," she whispered. He immediately kneeled beside her, eyes softening. "I'm Colonel Reynolds. Your husband asked me to keep an eye on your travel through Atlanta. I was nearby when Sergeant Meadows called. I got here as quickly as I could." Emotion trembled on Yvonne's face. I didn't expect her voice. Broke. "You don't need to say anything right now," Reynolds assured her. "You're not alone. We've got you." Behind him, Sergeant Alicia Meadows stood tall and watchful, her military posture, intact eyes, scanning for any threat, physical or bureaucratic. Darius Hughes, Paul Bowers' supervisor, hovered nearby, visibly uneasy, when he saw the military presence descend on his checkpoint. Panic crept into his features. "Colonel," he began cautiously, "I apologize for the scene. We're investigating internally." Reynolds stood, eyes narrowing. "No one lays hands on a pregnant woman. Not in my airport. Not in my country." Darius opened his mouth to respond, but Reynolds was already turning toward Paul Bowers. "You," the colonel said sharply. Paul straightened, stiff and defensive. "She was resisting. I followed protocol. You assaulted her." Reynolds replied without raising his voice. "We have witnesses. Video, my own soldier saw it happen." Paul's face tightened, his jaw twitching. She was holding up the line. I didn't know who she was." Reynolds stepped closer. "You didn't need to know who she was. She's a civilian. She's pregnant. She deserves protection, not aggression. The fact that she's Captain Carter's wife only makes your mistake more visible, not more wrong." The words cut through the noise like a blade. Paul shifted on his feet, glancing at the forming crowd. Reynolds turned to Sergeant Meadows' escort. "Mrs. Carter to medical. I want her checked out. Now, I'll take care of everything else." "Yes, sir." Meadows offered Yvonne her arm. As the sergeant guided Yvonne carefully through the stunned crowd, the other soldiers formed a respectful perimeter. Travelers looked on in hushed awe as the woman who had just been humiliated was now escorted like a head of state. No one questioned it. No one dared. In the distance, a child whispered to her mother, "Is she a hero?" Her mother bent down and said softly, "She's someone being protected, just like she should be." Yvonne walked slowly, her steps uncertain, but her resolve growing with every stride. She passed Paul, who couldn't meet her eyes. Darius mumbled, "We'll be reviewing all this, Mum. I promise." Yvonne didn't answer. Her silence spoke louder than any threat. It carried dignity, pain and strength all at once. As the group disappeared beyond the checkpoint, the terminal buzzed with the aftershock. For 10 unforgettable minutes, justice had arrived, not with rage, but with discipline, solidarity, and uniforms that demanded accountability. And Paul Bowers, for the first time in his career, found himself on the wrong end of authority. As the minutes rolled on, more and more people became aware of the incident. On social media, a traveler who had captured the push-on video tweeted it with the caption, "TSA guard shoves pregnant passenger, Colonel shows up. Atlanta airport drama. Taught justice for Yvonne." Within minutes, the clip was picking up retweets and fueling a public outcry in real time. The airport's public relations team scrambled to respond. Local news stations started calling for confirmation of an altercation at Hartsfield-Jackson. Meanwhile, Yvonne was taken to a quiet corner of the security area, where a hastily summoned paramedic performed a brief check. Her vitals were stable, but she was understandably distressed. The paramedic suggested she should get a more thorough exam soon. Colonel Reynolds promised to arrange it immediately. Paul's manager Darius anxiously informed the TSA main office. They in turn contacted the airport administration. Events were escalating faster than anyone could control. In the swirl of chaos, Paul stood near the checkpoint, arms folded, glaring at the group around Yvonne. The adrenaline that had fueled his aggression was starting to recede, replaced by a creeping sense of panic. He knew the weight of the complaint that was about to drop on him. Around them, passengers whispered. Some recognized Yvonne from the video spreading online. A hush of sympathy circled her. She found herself receiving gentle words of comfort from strangers, offers of water, and supportive pats on the shoulder. And in the midst of it all, Colonel Reynolds made several phone calls. The first was to Captain Jonathan Carter's direct line. Though overseas, Jonathan was able to answer for a brief window. The colonel spoke succinctly. "Captain, there's been an incident involving your wife at the Atlanta airport. She's fine. Physically, I have my people with her. We'll provide a full report shortly. I've already contacted your commanding officer." The colonel paused, listening to the flood of anxious questions on the other end. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'll keep you updated." The colonel ended the call, his face set with determination. What Paul Bowers did not know was that he had just ignited the wrath of more than just the people in that terminal. He had inadvertently gained the attention of senior military officials who cared deeply for one of their own. Sometimes the ramifications of a 10-second action could echo across continents. The paramedic finished examining Yvonne, concluding that she was stable enough to proceed to her flight. But it was her choice whether to go or seek immediate hospital care. Yvonne, though shaken, had a tearful determination in her eyes. "I need to get to New York," she told Colonel Reynolds and Sergeant Meadows. "My specialist is there. My baby's condition—" Her voice caught. "I can't miss this appointment." Meadows crouched beside her. "We'll get you there, but are you sure you're up for the flight?" "We can always rebook if you need more time." Yvonne glanced at the digital clock overhead. Her flight was departing in less than an hour. She had a direct flight that would arrive in time for her afternoon appointment. Missing it might set her treatment back weeks. She shook her head resolutely. "No, I have to go." Reynolds gave a single assertive nod. "Understood. We will escort you through. I'll make sure the airline accommodates you no matter what." He strode off to have a quick word with the airline's representatives, who by that point had also caught wind of the drama. Within minutes, they arranged to hold the flight if needed, or rebook Yvonne on a later flight in first class at no extra cost at her preference. The colonel was persuasive, and the airline recognized the gravity of the situation. In another corner, airport security had pulled Paul aside for questioning. Darius's face was pale as he explained the situation to a higher-ranking TSA official who had hurried over. The official frowned at Paul, reviewing his file, which contained the prior complaint. "Officer Bowers," the official said sternly, "this is the second time you've been accused of using excessive force. We also have witnesses claiming racial bias. If proven, that is absolutely grounds for immediate termination." Paul's mind raced. Hadn't he spent his life trying to keep things in order? Didn't he pride himself on being the enforcer who never let rules slide inside? Though he felt the prickle of shame, a fleeting voice inside him whispered that his anger had indeed gone too far. Yet the voice of pride roared back. Blaming Yvonne, the crowded lines, the phone cameras, anything to justify his actions. His lip curled. She was disrespectful. He muttered half under his breath, not caring if the official heard. The official's brow knitted at Paul's attitude. "I strongly suggest you remain silent and wait for your union rep," he advised coolly, "because from where I stand, we have a pregnant passenger, accompanied by military personnel, claiming you shoved her for no valid reason." Paul swallowed, feeling the walls close in on him. The wheels of karma were beginning to grind. Having ensured Yvonne was safe to continue, Colonel Reynolds, Sergeant Meadows, and 2 other uniformed National Guard members flanked her as she walked back to the security area. Other TSA agents quickly stepped aside, conducting a private screening for Yvonne. The tension in the air was now offset by the stunned respect for the uniformed entourage. As Yvonne cleared security, the colonel turned to the cluster of TSA supervisors. "I trust you'll be handling the formalities regarding Mr. Bowers," he said, giving them a steely look that spoke volumes. "Meanwhile, Ms. Carter is traveling on essential medical business. Any additional assistance you can provide, I expect you to offer it." One of the supervisor's mouth dry nodded vigorously. "Yes, Colonel. We'll make sure she gets to her gate without delay." True to that promise, Yvonne was whisked toward her gate in a golf cart, a small courtesy usually reserved for disabled or elderly passengers in need of expedited assistance. The crowd parted. People craned their necks to see her whispers trailing in her wake. The sight of the National Guard uniforms escorting a pregnant woman who had just been assaulted was surreal. Smartphones recorded it all. When they reached the gate, the airline representative approached with an apologetic smile. "Ms. Carter, we've upgraded your seat to first class. Please accept our apologies for everything that's happened." Yvonne, emotionally drained, managed a small, grateful nod. She turned to Colonel Reynolds, tears welling up again as the magnitude of the last half hour sunk in. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't even know how to process this." The colonel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Captain Carter is an honorable man, and you are family to all of us in uniform. We stand by you no matter what." Sergeant Meadows bent down to hug Yvonne. "I'll come with you to New York if you need. You shouldn't be alone." But Yvonne shook her head gently. "No, you probably have to be here. I'll be okay once I'm on the plane. Thank you so much." In that moment, the gate agent announced the final boarding for Yvonne's flight. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, surrounded by respect and care, in stark contrast to the humiliation she had endured minutes earlier. Yvonne walked onto the plane. Just as she disappeared down the jet bridge, she paused to look back at Colonel Reynolds and her uniformed protectors, as if silently thanking them for their swift intervention. 10 minutes had changed everything, from being shoved at security to receiving a personal escort by the National Guard. Yvonne's life had veered from fear and shame to safety and vindication. Still, as she settled into her first-class seat, an uneasy swirl of adrenaline lingered in her veins. She wiped away tears and tried to focus on the life growing within her. "We're okay," she murmured to her unborn daughter. "We're going to be okay." The morning chaos at Hartsfield-Jackson had barely begun to settle, but behind the walls of the administrative offices, a storm was erupting, and this one would not be contained. Paul Bowers sat stiffly in a grey metal chair outside the internal TSA investigations unit. His badge had already been surrendered, his airport access revoked. An officer's simple command, "Wait here," hung in the air like a final warning. Inside the airport's operations center, the footage of the incident was already under review. 3 different angles confirmed what dozens of witnesses had reported. A uniformed TSA officer had pushed a pregnant black woman at a security checkpoint. The image of Yvonne stumbling one hand, grasping her belly as her carry-on dropped, had burned itself into the minds of everyone who saw it. And the world was watching. Across the city, newsrooms buzzed. On local television anchors interrupted morning segments to announce breaking news. TSA officer allegedly pushes pregnant woman. Military officials intervene. Social media had erupted overnight. The video originally posted with the hashtag Raw Justice for Yvonne had now garnered over 2 million views. Celebrities, politicians, activists, and everyday citizens were voicing outrage. The pressure on airport administrators and TSA leadership was mounting by the hour. Meanwhile, Colonel Anthony Reynolds stood in front of a conference room of officials from TSA Airport Operations and the city's Public Safety Division. His face was stone. His words sharp. Mrs. Yvonne Carter is not only a private citizen, not only the wife of a captain in the U.S. Army, but also a woman carrying a high-risk pregnancy. She posed no threat, made no aggression, and yet your officer laid hands on her, in full view of travelers with a crowd watching and with no provocation. He paused, scanning the room. If Sergeant Meadows hadn't been present, and if I hadn't received that call in time, who knows what escalation could have followed. The room was silent. The TSA regional director cleared his throat, clearly rattled. "Colonel, we are taking this matter extremely seriously. Officer Bowers has been placed on immediate administrative leave. An internal investigation is underway. We are reviewing every second of footage and collecting all witness statements." Good, Reynolds replied. "Because this isn't just an internal affair anymore. The U.S. military is watching. The public is watching. This is now a matter of trust, optics, and justice." In a quieter wing of the airport, Yvonne was resting in a designated medical room under light observation. A paramedic had already checked her vitals. Her blood pressure was elevated, but the baby's heartbeat was steady. Sergeant Meadows stayed close, her military posture softened by the concern in her eyes. "You're stable," the paramedic told Yvonne. "But the stress levels you've experienced today aren't ideal. We'd strongly recommend follow-up care." Yvonne nodded quietly. She wasn't afraid, but she was exhausted. The emotional toll of being humiliated, shoved and then catapulted into the public spotlight, was settling on her body like a weight. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, a text from her OB/GYN in New York. "We saw the video. Please come as soon as you can. We'll keep a team ready for your arrival." Back in the TSA offices, Officer Bowers finally faced the Internal Affairs Review Board. His face was a storm of denial, defensiveness, and barely buried resentment. She was stalling the line he repeated for the 4th time. She was rude, dismissive, and raised her voice. "You pushed a pregnant woman," one of the investigators stated flatly, with visible force. On video, with no sign of physical threat. "You also ignored multiple warnings from your supervisor and attempted to justify your actions in front of a military colonel." Paul's hands clenched. "I was just doing my job." "No," the investigator replied coolly. "You were abusing your position." Outside, the ripple effect was growing. Local news outlets had sent vans to the airport parking lot, hoping to catch a glimpse of either Yvonne or the military officers involved. Travelers were giving impromptu interviews, describing what they had seen. Some were angry, some visibly shaken. "She didn't do anything," one traveler said. "She asked him to stop pushing. That's it. He went too far." Others recalled seeing the National Guard arrive. It was like something out of a movie. Another woman told a reporter. She went from being shoved to being protected by 6 soldiers. You don't see that every day. And yet the point wasn't the theatrics. It was the message. What happens when people in power abuse their authority? And what happens when someone with even more authority chooses to intervene? By noon, the airport had released a statement, carefully worded, We are aware of the incident involving a TSA officer and a passenger at our security checkpoint. We are working closely with TSA leadership and federal authorities to conduct a thorough investigation. The safety and dignity of all travelers are our top priority. But it wasn't enough. The internet wanted accountability, not PR spin. At home, Paul Bauer's wife was watching the news in their living room. Her face was tight with fury and disbelief. She didn't answer his texts. She didn't pick up his calls. And across the city in a quiet corner of the hospital, Yvonne Carter whispered softly to the child growing inside her, "No matter what this world looks like today, I promise I'll keep fighting to make it better for you." Colonel Reynolds did not leave the airport immediately. After finishing with the statements, he checked the flight status. Yvonne's plane was airborne. He made a quick call to the captain's overseas line, letting him know that Yvonne was on her way safely. The colonel also arranged for a friend in New York to meet her upon arrival. Satisfied that Yvonne was well cared for, he finally left for the day. That evening, Paul found himself in a dingy motel room near the airport. His wife had told him not to come home until he figured out how to explain what she saw on the news. He had gotten the dreaded call from her, "Paul, they're saying you assaulted a pregnant woman at the airport. Is it true?" Despite his protests, she told him to stay away until things cooled off. So there he was, alone with a flickering TV set, showing the news coverage of his mistake. For hours he watched in horror as pundits ripped into him, calling him an example of power, gone to one's head, of racial bias, of cruelty toward the vulnerable. He felt the walls close in tighter. For the first time in years, Paul allowed a hint of regret to pierce his pride. He knew he should never have laid a hand on Yvonne. He tried to quiet the feeling, telling himself it was a reflex. It was her fault. It was the tension. But in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, "You crossed a line." The wheels of the aircraft touched down at LaGuardia Airport with a gentle jolt, and Yvonne Carter exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Her body was aching, not from the flight itself, but from the emotional weight that had followed her like a storm cloud. Ever since that morning in Atlanta, she had been pushed, humiliated, thrown into national headlines. And now, finally, she had made it to New York, where her prenatal specialist was waiting. As the seatbelt light turned off, a flight attendant approached quietly. "Mrs. Carter, we've arranged for someone to meet you at the gate," she said kindly. "They'll assist you to your appointment." Yvonne nodded gratefully. Her voice was too hoarse to speak. Waiting just past the gate was First Lieutenant Grace Summers, a composed, broad-shouldered woman in civilian clothes, but unmistakably military in bearing. She greeted Yvonne with a warm, steady voice. "Ma'am, I'm Grace. I'm a friend of Sergeant Meadows and Colonel Reynolds. I'm here to get you to your specialist. You're in good hands." Tears welled in Yvonne's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Grace glanced down at the wheelchair provided by the airline. "We can walk if you prefer," she said gently. "But after everything you've been through, I'd really suggest letting me push you." Yvonne hesitated. Part of her wanted to walk, to reclaim some piece of control. But her legs were heavy, her heart was still racing, and her baby's health came first. She gave a small nod and sat down. As Grace navigated her through the terminal, Yvonne's mind spun. Her face had appeared on news stations, hashtags and video clips. She had gone from a quiet, expectant mother to a reluctant symbol of resilience, and yet none of that mattered now. What mattered was that her baby was still okay, or so she hoped. They reached the baggage claim, retrieved her suitcase, and stepped into a waiting car. Grace rode with her, staying alert, constantly glancing toward Yvonne with subtle concern. You're very quiet, Grace said after a while. Yvonne forced a faint smile, just replaying everything, trying to make sense of it, trying not to fall apart. Grace nodded her voice, gentle but firm. You don't have to make sense of it. You just have to get through today. But the moment the car pulled up to the medical center, Yvonne felt something shift inside her. Something wrong. A sharp twinge cut across her belly and her vision blurred momentarily. She gasped, "Grace." Grace immediately leaned forward. "Driver, we need to get her inside now." The car hadn't even stopped fully when Grace was already helping Yvonne out, supporting her, as they rushed into the building. The front desk staff recognized Yvonne's name instantly from the appointment log and the news. "She's here." "We need Dr. Whitfield now," a nurse called out. Yvonne was whisked into an examination room, tears sliding down her cheeks as a wave of nausea and anxiety rolled through her. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands shook. The image of Paul Bowers's shove flashed in her mind like a cruel replay. Had the stress harmed the baby? Was she too late? The room filled with movement and machines. A nurse attached a fetal monitor to Yvonne's belly. Another began checking her vitals. The obstetrician. Dr. Helena Whitfield strode in moments later, radiating calm control. "You're safe now, Yvonne," Dr. Whitfield said, placing a reassuring hand on her patient's arm. "Let's see how the little one is doing." Everyone went silent as the monitor beeped steadily. Then a sound filled the room, a strong rhythmic heartbeat. "There," Dr. Whitfield said, smiling softly. "That's your daughter still kicking, still fighting." Yvonne's body sagged in relief, tears pouring down as she let out a shaky laugh. She's okay. But you're not out of the woods yet." Dr. Whitfield added gently, "Your blood pressure is elevated, and your stress levels are dangerously high. We're going to keep you here overnight for monitoring." No arguments. Yvonne didn't argue. She simply nodded, clutching her stomach like a lifeline. Outside the room, Grace called, "Colonel Reynolds to update him. She's stable, sir." Grace reported, "Baby's okay for now, but the stress triggered a scare. She'll be kept overnight." "Good work." Reynolds replied, "Stay with her. We'll coordinate from here." Later that evening, Yvonne lay in the dim hospital room, gently dripping monitors, softly beeping. Grace sat nearby, flipping through a magazine, silently letting her presence serve as reassurance. Yvonne spoke at last, her voice raspy. "I've been through racism before. Subtle looks, microaggressions. But this time, it was physical. It was public. It was so loud." Grace closed the magazine and leaned forward. "And you're still standing. Only because people like you showed up," Yvonne said. "And because I had no choice. I have to be strong for her." Grace looked at her with pride. "You're doing more than surviving. You're fighting back with every breath." Yvonne looked down at her belly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Once again, she deserves a better world. Grace reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. "And because of you, she's going to have one." After a tense hour of monitoring and tests, the specialist, Dr. Helena Whitfield, reassured Yvonne that her baby's heartbeat was strong and the discomfort was likely caused by acute stress. Still, Dr. Whitfield insisted on keeping Yvonne for observation overnight. "Better safe than sorry," the doctor said gently, exhausted but relieved. Yvonne sank into the hospital bed. Grace stayed beside her, updating Colonel Reynolds by phone. After hanging up, Grace took Yvonne's hand. "You're safe now," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Yvonne exhaled, tears gathering in her eyes. I've had my share of subtle discrimination before, she said, voice cracking. But I never thought I'd be physically shoved like that, especially with my condition. She placed her other hand protectively over her belly. I just want my daughter to enter a kinder world. Grace nodded, her voice tight with emotion. That's exactly what we all want, and we're going to see justice done. Yvonne's eyes flickered with a quiet determination. She knew now that this wasn't just about her. It was about preventing someone else from suffering the same trauma. If Paul Bowers had a pattern of misconduct, it needed to be exposed. She would speak up not just to protect herself, but to stand against injustice. Back in Atlanta, the gears of an official TSA and airport police investigation were turning fast. Paul Bowers was summoned for multiple interviews. He was told to surrender his airport access badge until the inquiry concluded. The phone in his motel room rang continuously, with calls from reporters eager for a statement. He ignored them, feeling both shame and anger. He was under explicit instructions from TSA union lawyers to say nothing to the media. In parallel, the TSA's higher-ups faced intense public scrutiny. Social media was ablaze condemnation pouring in from high-profile figures. Activists called for the immediate termination of Paul Bowers. Local politicians weighed in, wanting to ensure the city's busiest airport didn't become a symbol of racial injustice. Within days, the TSA's preliminary findings were made public. The video evidence clearly showed excessive force, and multiple witness statements supported the victim's account. Paul Bowers was found in violation of protocol. The calls for his dismissal grew louder. Paul, in a desperate bid to salvage his reputation, hired a lawyer who specialized in employment disputes. Together they concocted a narrative painting Yvonne as combative. But the story crumbled under the weight of evidence. Airport camera footage captured the entire incident from multiple angles, leaving little doubt about what had transpired. 1 week after the incident that had ignited national outrage, the halls of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport were once again filled with reporters, not tourists, not travelers, but journalists from every major media outlet in the country. A long table had been set up in a press conference room near the administration wing. Dozens of chairs faced it, occupied by news anchors, investigative journalists, freelance writers and camera crews, microphones from CNN, NBC, local news channels, and independent platforms crowded the front of the podium like metal petals waiting to bloom. The story had dominated headlines for days. TSA officer pushes, pregnant black woman, National Guard intervenes. The video had gone viral. The hashtags, Darsha Justice for Yvonne, pregnant not threat, and accountability, now had trended globally. Now the public demanded answers, and the airport was finally ready to speak. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the door at the side of the room opened, and the airport's public relations director, the TSA regional administrator, Colonel Anthony Reynolds, and a city official entered together. The camera flashes erupted instantly, capturing every movement, every expression. The PR director, a woman in her mid-40s with composed features and a somber air, stepped to the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. We know the past several days have raised deep concerns, not just about the incident itself, but about broader questions of conduct, dignity, and public trust. We are here to address those concerns transparently." She paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle over the room. After a full investigation involving airport administration, the Transportation Security Administration, eyewitness accounts, and security footage from multiple angles, we have concluded that TSA officer Paul Bowers used excessive force without cause against passenger Mrs. Yvonne Carter, who, as many of you now know, is the wife of U.S. Army Captain Jonathan Carter and was 7 months pregnant at the time. Reporters murmured, scribbling notes rapidly. The PR director continued, "This conduct not only violates TSA standards, it violated basic human decency. As a result, Officer Bowers has been terminated, effective immediately." Furthermore, the TSA will issue a formal apology to Mrs. Carter and her family. Additional disciplinary action is under internal review for failures in supervisory protocol. The room buzzed with tension as reporters raised hands and called out, "Has Mrs." Carter responded to the apology. Is she planning to sue? Will there be criminal charges filed? Before the PR director could answer, Colonel Reynolds stepped forward. His crisp uniform stood out starkly against the backdrop, and his mere presence silenced the crowd. Mrs. Carter is currently recovering from the physical and emotional impact of that day. She experienced a medical complication shortly after arriving in New York. Thankfully, both she and her unborn child are now in stable condition. The room hushed. The colonel's jaw flexed as he continued. She has read the TSA's apology, but make no mistake, apologies alone do not erase trauma. This incident will stay with her. It is our duty as leaders, citizens and human beings to ensure it doesn't happen again. My team responded not because she is the wife of a soldier, but because no one should be treated that way. Ever. Applause broke out from a few attendees, unexpected, raw human. He continued more quietly. Mrs. Carter has not yet made a decision regarding legal action. Her focus remains on her health and her child. Any further statements will be released through her family and legal representation. Outside, the press conference aired live across multiple networks. Yvonne watched from her hospital room in New York, her hand resting gently on her belly as the colonel's voice filled the screen. Her eyes welled with tears, not of pain but of resolution. "They listened," she whispered. They finally listened. Beside her, First Lieutenant Grace. Summers gave a small nod. "You turned a nightmare into change. People won't forget this." Meanwhile, in a dim motel room near the airport, Paul Bowers sat frozen in front of the TV. His name had been plastered across the lower third of the news screen for days now. No job, no union defense, no support, just a country that now saw him as the face of racial profiling and abuse of power. As the colonel's words played out on screen, no one should be treated that way. Paul's expression darkened. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through missed calls, angry voicemails, even messages from old friends who were now distancing themselves. His wife hadn't answered a single one of his texts since the story broke. The silence around him was unbearable. He turned the TV off, but the words still rang in his ears. Back at the airport, the press conference wrapped up, but the impact was just beginning in the following hours. The TSA announced new mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all frontline staff. Airlines across the country began reviewing their protocols for handling pregnant and vulnerable passengers. Civil rights groups issued formal praise for the swift action taken, but also demands for broader reform. Karma had landed. For Paul Bowers, it came in the form of national disgrace. For Yvonne Carter, it came in the form of truth, seen, heard, and defended loudly. And for the country, it came as a hard-earned reminder that power is a privilege, not a weapon. 2 months later, Yvonne found herself back at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, this time with her husband, Captain Jonathan Carter, who had returned from overseas duty on emergency leave after hearing about the incident. Yvonne's belly was larger now, and she looked radiant, albeit more cautious. They were traveling to her home state for a family baby shower. As they approached the security checkpoint, Yvonne hesitated for a moment, memories of the push flashing through her mind. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. "We're together now," he whispered. To their relief, the TSA officers on duty were courteous and efficient. One recognized Yvonne from the viral news story and offered a gentle, respectful greeting. "Mrs. Carter, good to see you. Well, have a safe trip." A wave of gratitude washed over Yvonne. She thanked the officer softly, then passed through the scanner without incident. Together, she and her husband made their way to the gate, leaving behind the memory of that horrible day. Yet in a way that memory had sparked necessary change, both within the airport's culture and in Yvonne's own sense of empowerment. She had faced humiliation, but she had also discovered the strength of community and support. She had endured stress, yet her child remained healthy. She had been wronged, but justice had been served in a rare, swift manner. Life was not always fair, but sometimes decency and truth prevailed. A month later, Yvonne gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom she named Faith Carter. Captain Jonathan Carter was by her side in the hospital, tears of joy streaming down his face. Colonel Reynolds and Sergeant Meadows visited with flowers and gifts, cooing over the infant in awe. In a quiet moment, Yvonne looked down at her sleeping daughter, a tender smile touching her lips. "You'll never know how much drama you were a part of before you even arrived," she whispered. "But I'll spend the rest of my life showing you the kindness and respect this world should offer every child Faith slept on, unaware of the storm that had raged around her before she was born. But in her peaceful slumber, she was a beacon of hope, proof that moments of injustice and cruelty can be overcome by solidarity, love, and the unwavering resolve to stand against what is wrong across the city, Paul. Bowers sat in his living room, unemployed, stewing in regret. He occasionally glanced at the classifieds, but his tarnished reputation made job hunting an uphill battle. The hush of his home was a daily reminder of the choices he had made. The emptiness of that quiet was its own kind of sentence, a slow, relentless echo of if only, if only. But for Yvonne, Captain Carter, Colonel Reynolds, and the men and women who rallied behind her, the future was bright. And for anyone who watched from afar, the story became a cautionary tale about the potent force of both cruelty and compassion, how 10 minutes of malice can change a life, and how swift collective action can set things right again. Thank you for sharing in Yvonne Carter's harrowing, yet ultimately triumphant journey, from the moment she was pushed by an airport guard to the time military officials stepped in. We witnessed how quickly a life can be turned upside down and then saved by courage, unity, and sheer determination. This story reminds us that no one is truly alone when people band together against injustice. We saw a swift, dramatic downfall for those who misuse their power, and a powerful sense of relief and validation for those who stand on the side of truth. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the importance of kindness and standing up for what's right, please give this video a like, share it with your friends to spread awareness, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking stories. Thank you for watching. And remember, compassion can change everything.